Whenever there's chaos and confusion, the Democrats see an opportunity to push the country farther left. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is my take on the news. So again, we're not going to be able to avoid talking about corona for a long, long time now. And we stop and think about the ramifications beyond the disease. The disease is a problem itself. No one on our side of the table argues that the disease is not a serious issue. No one argues that the disease is not something we should take very seriously. But as many other people have pointed out, including a recent interview I did with Art Thompson, CEO of the John Birch Society, we pointed out that, as Donald Trump himself did, that tens of thousands of people every year die from the influenza, including we're on track for about 50,000 of those deaths this year from flu alone. And despite the fact that we have immunizations, we have vaccines, we've identified all sorts of different kinds of strains of flu, we get our senior citizens more or less vaccinated, and the fact is that 50,000 die or so every year. The reality is that that's much less in this country right now for coronavirus. There is no vaccine that we know, not even really a reliable test yet. And so the kind of really Orwellian steps that state governments in particular are taking are chronically problematic. But before we go on and talk about that, the important thing I think we want to talk about for today, because it makes a big difference, is how the Democrat Party is hijacking and basically blackmailing the American people. They're holding the American people hostage for some of these aid and relief packages that the federal government wants to enact in terms of propping up and supporting the economy, in terms of trying to help small business owners, in trying to help with payroll issues across the country and insurance issues. The Democrats have decided that they're going to use this opportunity in perfect Rahm Emanuel style. Remember, Rahm said, "We never let a crisis go to waste in the Democrat Party." Anytime that there is chaos, whether it's man-made, an act of God, whether it's human-manipulated, whenever there's chaos and confusion, the Democrats see an opportunity to push the country farther left. Congressman Clyburn actually came out and said that in this Democrat African-American came out and said, in this coronavirus pandemic, we see an opportunity, he said, to rework the country along the lines that we want it to be. So these crises, we got to understand and be very aware of this, because this way we can fight it. Understand that to the left, American suffering is an opportunity for political maneuvering. Now, you can say a lot of cynical things about the Republicans, and most of it's true, but you can't quite say it about the Republicans the same way you say it about the Democrats, that they see your suffering as an opportunity not to help you, but to subordinate you, not to use the full power of government to ease your burden, but to burden you with more and more and more successively big government that's going to drag you down in the short and in the long term. This is what they do. It is absolutely scandalous when you think about what they've loaded, the pork they've loaded into these bills, these Senate bills, to try to get some aid out to the people. They're actually wanting to bring back Obama phones. I remember that in 2009, right, when Obama took office. And one of the first things you had was all these people running through the streets talking about how they got their Obama phone, right? And Obama gave them a phone. And 8 years into the Obama administration, even after the immediate crisis of the market collapse in 2008 and 2009, they were still buying phones for people who didn't even need them. And that's a big lesson here. The last time we had a crisis, a much smaller crisis, but the last time we had one was about 2008 when the markets crashed and you had all the stimulus money, you had all we were told by the outgoing president, Republican George Bush, and the incoming president, Barack Obama, we were told that unless we took billions and billions, not trillions like we're talking today, back then it was billions, 10, 12 years ago, take billions and billions of taxpayer money and use it to prop up banks and car companies. If we didn't do that, the entire system would implode. And we find out now in retrospect how much of that money never actually got beyond the banks, how much of that money never went to the causes that they said we were going to use it for. And we also now realize that a lot of that money was spent needlessly. It was unnecessary. It was unnecessary to give all that money to the banks. Years after, 4 or 5 years after, banks were sitting on huge cash reserves because they had been given all this money and they didn't really have any impulsion to spend it or to invest it. So you think about that. and you think about the degree to which since 2008, 2009, one more example of this, how much money of the so-called stimulus we know went to Arne Duncan's Department of Education to implement things like Common Core. We know that billions of dollars that was supposed to be earmarked for helping Americans, helping banks and car companies, helping to keep the economy afloat, a lot of that money was just diverted right to the Department of Education. Our own taxpayer emergency fund stimulus money was given to the Department of Education to spend on hijacking American public schools. How much of this potentially $2 trillion package that the Democrats and the Republicans are arguing over, how much of that $2 trillion do you think is going to go to graft and waste? The Democrats themselves, besides demanding Obama phones, they want to spend $300 million overseas to help non-American refugees in non-American countries. They want to protect the ability of foreign nationals and illegal aliens working in this country to be protected. In other words, they're going to protect foreign nationals who work here taking American jobs and illegal immigrants who are taking American jobs. They want protections, the Democrats, and aid packages just for those workers at the expense of actual American workers. Over and beyond this, the kinds of things that they're promoting here, the Democrats, the kind of pork, they want to have ballot harvesting. If you know anything about California and this trick called ballot harvesting, the way they're able to manipulate votes and where votes go and how votes are counted, this is one of the reasons why California became completely a blue state, where there are almost absolutely no Republicans at any level of government. They want to make that mandatory for every state in the union. It gets even worse than that. They want to have call-in votes or mail-in votes. They want to be able to have phone votes and or mail-in votes. They want people to be able to register to vote on the very same day as the election. As we know, and we've seen in previous elections, this absolutely gerrymanders the system to Democrats as they go about dragging illegal immigrants to polls, busing them to polls, signing them up on the same day so that no one can bother to check or do an investigation the same day as the election. These are just some of the arguments that the pork that the Democrats are trying to exploit in this time of crisis. All their target demographics, all of their identity politics, all of their social engineering. This is what the Democrats are using this crisis to burden you with. They are demanding that any airline, for instance, that gets any money from bailouts in this new legislation will be forced to initiate offset the money they get with carbon emission reductions. A huge sop to environmentalists in this. Planned Parenthood, right, is going to get more of your taxpayer dollars to do more abortions if the Democrats have their way. Now, thankfully, Donald Trump came out and squashed this today. He said, no, we're not doing that. Mitch McConnell, otherwise quiet, mild-mannered Mitch, was out there really giving it to the Democrats today, and that's great. But think about this for a second. They're not fighting about spending $2 trillion, which should be the fight. They're fighting about what we're going to spend it on. And that right there is a sense of how dysfunctional our government is. It doesn't seem to bother anybody that in a government that's already trillions of dollars in debt, we're going to add $2 trillion immediately within the space of a year or two. What this is going to do for inflation, what this is going to do to further devalue the dollar, how this is going to open the possibility that the dollar ceases to be the lingua franca, so to speak, of currency, how much closer this is going to push us from the dollar being removed and perhaps the Chinese dollar, right? The Chinese currency becoming the gold standard of the world. It isn't a remarkable thing that this virus that came from China is going to have significantly more destructive power over our republic, over our forms of government, over our fiscal well-being, over the future vision of what this country should be, than as if the Chinese had actually won a war against us. The ability of this virus, because of our panic and our need to be perceived as government who does something immediately for show, rather than thinking it through. Because of all of these, the corrupt nature of our politics, the Republic is in greater danger today than it has ever been in our history, even with the possible exception of the Civil War. But this is getting close to that. Once this is over, once in 6 months the virus is gone, what's going to remain of our structure of government? Now that this terrible precedent has been set, they can set it again for anything. If you can do it for a virus that's killed relatively as few people as have died from corona, why can't you do it about drunk driving? Why can't you declare an emergency over almost anything? Anything at all that could be dangerous to this level. I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, and this has been my take on the news.